then, I just want to make sure we have enough time for breakout groups. So the focus for this Let's Talk is on what's holding you back from being happy. And our special guest is James Frail. He's the founder and partner at Stevenson Frail Associates. For those that are new to Let's Talk, there's one singular purpose of these Let's Talk calls. How do we create an environment where participants can help support each other during this global crisis and beyond? So more than ever, we need to come together as a community to support and uplift each other. So my goal is for you guys to be able to connect with each other either on LinkedIn or via email to kind of broaden our community in this crazy world we call COVID. So our Let's Talk series is a monthly conversation with leading executives, thought leaders, and change makers. There's no presentation or talking heads, just people having a conversation about career, family, and what matters the most to them. So if you can, please turn on your video because we want you in the conversation. This isn't a webinar where you get to just kind of watch passively. We actually want you to be a part of the discussion and part of the conversation. And if you can't, that's fine too, but we'd love to see your beautiful faces. So quick exercise for this next activity. Top right-hand side, put yourself on gallery mode so we look like the Brady Bunch grid. For those that are new to Let's Talk, we always start our calls with a series of questions, okay? So for this activity, you're just gonna raise your hand if you agree, okay? Do you sometimes find yourself working hard at the exclusion of all else? Do you find yourself taking care of everyone and everything else first? Raise your hand if you agree. Do you sometimes catch yourself comparing yourself to others? Rather than living in the present moment, do you find yourself living in the past or contemplating the future? Do you seek perfection in your life? Do you listen to everyone's problems without boundaries? Do you have the habit of responding to every call to attention, email, phone, text right away? Have you used the phrase, "I'm just too busy," as an excuse? Have you done that in the past month to get out of something that would have actually brought joy in your life? Do you feel like you always have to be right? Do you feel the need to always live up to people's expectations? Do you feel yourself pleasing others at the expense of your own dreams and desires? Okay. So if you've said yes to any of these, it might point to a trigger that might be holding you back from happiness. So in itself, many of those are innocuous or sometimes beneficial for us, right? It's important to work hard. But at what point does it stop blocking you from happiness? And today's discussion, and if you want, for now, top right-hand side, put yourself into speaker mode for this next portion. Okay, so you'll just see me and James for the next part, and make sure you're on mute as well. Today's discussion is on what's holding you back from being happy. Sometimes our lives outwardly seem perfect, yet happiness eludes us. I'm going to share a little secret with you. I'm a recovering workaholic. For almost 2 decades of my life, I equated happiness with success. In high school and college, it was about getting straight A's. As an entrepreneur in my 20s, it was about building my business and making as much money as I could. When I went corporate, it was about climbing this imaginary corporate ladder. This is the thing. What happens when you spend years and years of your life clawing it, inching your way up to the top of this freaking imaginary ladder, having to deal with bad bosses, not being appreciated, not taking care of your health and mental well-being, burning the midnight hour, the oil. And when you get to the top, you realize this isn't what I really wanted all along. As I mentioned before, these characteristics like hard work in itself is not a bad thing, and they are often good things. But when we use it as a Band-Aid to mask the pain and wound we have inside of ourselves to avoid life or real meaningful relationships and connections, it becomes an issue. So for the longest time, I gave myself countless excuses. I'm going to be happy once I get my degree. I'm going to be happy when I get this amount of money. I'm going to be happy when I get married or have a kid or lose 10 pounds. When I think of this subject, I also think about my mother. She worked day and night to support my family, 7 days a week. She took care of everyone and everything first. And she always put her family ahead of her. She's now 85, fighting dementia, because she kept on waiting and postponing happiness. And now there's days where she can't even remember who I am. So this is the thing. All of our definitions of happiness is going to be different. What brings us joy, what brings me joy is going to be different than what brings you joy. The key is, can you define what brings you joy and happiness? Because being able to define that is paramount. The second thing is, can you define the habits that are holding you back from being happy? It's a good start. And I'm going to leave you with this quote. We first make our habits, then our habits make us. So that whole notion of pleasing, of working hard, they were just kind of bad habits that in some ways were beneficial for me, but in other ways, it also kind of deterred me from being happy. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to James Frail. By many measures, James had a successful career. He was a Reserve Infantry Officer, earned his BA in economics at the University of Ottawa in Canada. On graduation, he became part owner of a successful company. He moved to London, Ontario to earn an MBA from the Ivey Business School. And upon graduating, he moved to Toronto to join KPMG's consulting firm. In 1999, James was recruited by a tech startup as employee number 25 and went to San Francisco. After a $100 million IPO, they scaled and their market cap ballooned to over $1 billion. When the bubble burst, he moved to Calgary for love. He met his wife, Elizabeth, and they married in 2001. And in 2004, they started their own consulting business, Stevenson Frail Associates. His clients include billion-dollar energy companies. And, for a period of time, James was in a leadership team of a $1.4 billion business unit. James and Elizabeth are active, competing in Ironman Canada together. And no matter outwardly how successful James might have seemed, he struggled with a sense of finding happiness and finding meaning in his life. And then tragedy struck in 2016 when Elizabeth was struck by an SUV while crossing the street. She almost died. James took the next 2 years off to take care of Elizabeth through her surgeries, extensive physiotherapy, couples post-traumatic stress disorder therapy, and he used this period as a sabbatical for research and deep work of self-discovery. James is now an executive coach and chairs peer advisory groups for founders, CEOs, and business leaders. James, if you want to unmute yourself and kind of introduce yourself. I know we had a chat late last week about, first this kind of traumatic experience with Elizabeth and like this whole notion of journey of like finding happiness. You also kind of mentioned dealing with PTSD, but also with other challenges that you have had. Do you want to kind of share with the group kind of like how you kind of overcame these challenges and what kind of helped you really kind of move towards happiness?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see all the smiling faces. Lan, thanks so much for having me on today. And I don't want to burn up through too much time because I want to get to the point where we can discuss people's issues and what's getting in the way of their happiness. But I would like to share a little bit about my story, and I think that will help you see why I'm an expert in happiness, because I've made so many mistakes along the way and to hit so many roadblocks. So the first one I want to tell you is about the biggest roadblock I hit, and that was as a kid growing up with a very successful sister, 13 years older than me, Diane, and she became a doctor, a medical doctor. And that was so well received by everybody in my family. My dad loved it, and he thought that I should become a doctor as well, and put a ton of pressure on me to become a doctor. And I think I was in second year of undergraduate trying to get into medicine, and one of my good friends committed suicide, and it was very upsetting. We were both very unlikely to get into med school, and that was a really big pivot in my life where I renegotiated the relationship I had with my dad, who put a lot of pressure on me, and I decided that I wanted to find out what I was good at and not try to live my sister's life, but try to live my own life. I was a little bit late to start, but it ended up really helping me be successful, certainly on the successful side. I had so much pressure as a kid that I never really felt good. I never really felt confident. I always felt like I wasn't good enough. So much of my life has been a lot of competition, in sports and in business and in school, to try to feel good enough. And when I got married to Elizabeth, we both really needed each other. We had a very, very close relationship, and in fact, probably too close. We some people would probably call us codependent, because we just were always together and very sensitive to each other. And although we were devoted to each other, we didn't really have the boundaries to be able to feel safe with each other. Both of us had very abusive parents, narcissistic parents, and that made it very hard for us to know what proper boundaries were. So the biggest, when Lan and I talked, I think she said to me, "What has been, the real mission of your life?" And I started to talk about my clients, and she said, "No, I want to hear your story. What has your story been?" And so I stepped back and corrected myself, and I said, my story really has been to try to find a state of happiness. And I have never, despite how successful I have been, moderate success, what have you, I just never really felt fully happy. And I felt like on the outside, people would think I was successful, but I just never really felt like I achieved it on the inside. And when the accident happened, that was in 2016 and a half. I was working on a big project, and my wife was walking through the neighborhood, and she got hit by a car while crossing the street. The driver didn't see her, so she was very badly injured. I'll spare you the details. Some people get squeamish, but it almost killed her. And if she wasn't phenomenally fit, so she had broken hips, broken pelvis, torn diaphragm, collapsed lung, broken ribs, broken clavicle, massive bruising. So the surgeon didn't know whether he could save her. And so fortunately, we live right near the hospital. And she was going to be in hospital for 6 months, and she ended up getting out much earlier. And I had to quit the job I had. I had a big job implementing a cloud software for a local university, and so I had to take that time off with her. And I was completely flattened by the severity. I really lost a sense of self. I lost a complete sense of wellness, and I was so traumatized, to see my wife in this terrible state. I think she had 7 tubes entering her body, and just massive bruising. Her legs and her torso looked like they had been spray painted black. She was so bruised, and it was deeply traumatizing. So after a few months of recovery in hospital, then she came out and started to do physiotherapy, and that was very painful. And we ended up, I suggested that we go for couples therapy. And we did that in a PTSD therapy, and we started that in February of 2017. And we worked very hard at it, and we learned how to, when you work with a psychotherapist. Has anybody ever worked with one? Just raise your hand if you have ever worked with a therapist at all. Okay, just a couple people. Yeah. It's a terrific learning experience. You realize how somebody's manner, the way they look at you, the way they talk to you, and the way they care for you with their relationship, they can make you feel safe together. And so through our couples therapy, one of the biggest things that I learned is that both Elizabeth and I had something called anxious attachment style. And what that means is that somewhere in growing up, attachment theory goes right back to childhood. And there's a terrific book on it. I've got it right behind me. It's called Attached. And this was a huge learning for us. We realized that, and the author is Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller. And what we realized is that, and there are 3 attachment styles. So the anxious, there is the secure, which is somebody that is comfortable with attachment. And then the third one is avoidant. And those are people who are really not comfortable with attachment. So the significance of me telling you about this is that when we had arguments or disagreements or any kind of difficulty in our relationship, underlying at a guttural, level, we feared that the other person was going to abandon us. So our arguments would escalate, our challenges, our difficulties would escalate very quickly into feeling very threatened in our relationship. So we learned how to speak safely with each other, and we learned to develop boundaries, and that really helped us. But we couldn't really fully get to the bottom of why we were not getting along. And my therapist talked to a psychiatrist and said, I'm working with this couple. They love each other. They're very smart. They're working very, very hard, doing tons of research, and they just can't get along. And he said, there's probably one of 2 sources. That you have a drug addiction that hasn't been diagnosed. And the other one is that maybe you have, one of the parties has ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So in therapy, Dr. Kathleen asked me if I had ADHD. And I said, no, I'd never thought of it. It never occurred to me. Nobody had ever mentioned that to me. I had been an Army officer, so I had a lot of discipline and had an ability to carry myself. And so a lot of the signs that you would see with somebody with ADHD, I hadn't really exhibited them. However, when I did the test and Elizabeth and I found out about ADHD, we realized that I have it, and I've started taking medication. And what it does for people is it increases your executive function. So ADHD is really just, we're set up, you know, if you think about the whole spectrum of being somebody that is really very sensitive right through to somebody that is not very sensitive, somebody that can operate in high risk environments. So people like firefighters and police and emergency physicians and anybody, people that do high risk sports and so on, tend to be more on the ADHD side. We're able to operate in dangerous environments without feeling flooded by emotion. However, it makes us, we look for novelty. We have difficulty sometimes with our emotions. We're highly, emotionally reactive. We have a different sense of time. There are a number of different disadvantages to it. And ultimately, it causes difficulty in the relationship because we tend to be unreliable. The other partner tends to have to be more of a parent, and you end up getting a bit of a parent-to-child dynamic, resentment, and so on. So we were able to, once I took the medication, I was able to feel much less reactive, much more able to be present and attend to Elizabeth's emotional needs. I found that I was able to do a lot more of the work that our psychologist had given us to do. So through the whole process, I would say one of the biggest things I learned is that you can make yourself really unhappy in a relationship, even though you're very, very close to each other and love each other. That if you don't have good boundaries and you don't have the ability to see how you trigger each other, you can cause a lot of upset and unhappiness. So that was one of the big learnings. Another big learning through therapy is that if you've grown up with a narcissist or somebody that is abusive in your life, you can be unaware of just how negatively you talk to yourself. So I had a terrible inner monologue, and it took me being in therapy to realize how harshly and critical I spoke to myself. And I want you to reflect on this. Each of us has our inner monologue going, and nobody will talk to you more in your life than you. You should stop and reflect on the voice that you use with yourself. Is it a berating voice? Is it critical? Is it or is it a loving voice that is supportive and understanding and wants the best for you? So that was another thing that I really learned about is that I had to change the way I spoke to myself. When I mentioned my father and him being critical, I have to forgive him because he had a father that was heavily damaged by the First World War. And so he was never really able to see how he should be as a father, loving, understanding, and help me develop. So I forgive him for that. And part of my process of growth was to be able to accept that I didn't have the relationship that I would have wanted. So I did a process that's called reparenting. And reparenting is where you imagine the ideal parent that you wish you had, and you adopt that parent as your inner monologue. It sounds like a crazy concept, but by doing that and by allowing myself to mourn for the relationship that I wish I had had with my father, it allowed me to move on. It allowed me to accept the relationship that I did have, and it allowed me to have a much clearer voice around how I wanted to talk to myself, the role model that I wanted to be. So I'm a grandparent, and so I have adopted that kind of ideal parent as my ideal that I strive towards to be for my grandkids. and I'm careful about not only how I talk to them, but how I look at them, because emotional abuse and emotional pain can be transmitted in many different ways, from a look to a huff to gestures and so on. So that's another thing that I became aware of.
James, did you ever, were you ever, this is Lan, were you ever able to confront your father or speak to him after the therapy that you received?
No, my father was gone by then. My parents had me when they were 43 and 42, so they were much older. So they've been gone for a while. But these psychologists refer to relationships as almost like being like objects that live on in us, and so just because somebody passes doesn't mean that identity passes. So you still have to resolve it. Another thing I had to resolve was the relationship with some of my family members who had, so my father had very, I would call them very pious religious views, didn't want me having girlfriends, was critical of me in many, many different aspects. And family members can actually, in that sort of dynamic, can shame you for past behavior. So judgments that my dad made towards me for having had girlfriends. My sister married her first boyfriend. So my sister was criticizing me for not studying and not being serious enough. And I had to renegotiate my relationship with my sister and say to her, I live according to my values. I have had wonderful relationships. It's been a joyous part of my life, and I do not feel shame for having had girlfriends in school. So that was a part of the work I had to do with my family to renegotiate the way people would talk to me, so that we could be on an adult to adult level. And that was a terrific move. And if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't renegotiated those relationships, I don't think I would have really felt completely fulfilled. So since we've gone through therapy, since we have I take the medication, I have gone through phenomenal growth, and psychologists would call it growth in my social psychological maturity. And so some of the things that I've done that, probably a lot of the things that you hear about commonly, working on my emotional intelligence, working on my mindfulness. And so I was so abused as a kid. I really tried to block my feelings, and I would be hypervigilant. So I would look at other people and, especially authority figures, and really try hard to predict try to read their emotions. And I actually was a little confused around my own emotions. So getting in touch with my emotions after a life of blocking my emotions because I didn't have the skills to be able to, regulate, calm myself down, was another really important thing for me to do. I would say one of the biggest learnings in my marriage and my relationship is you can't make somebody else happy. They have to make themselves happy. All you can do is be a good partner to them, be respectful to them, try to be as loving and understanding, and be a great friend to them. And they have to be to you as well. And, one of the other terrific books that, and this is the author of this, Dr. Sue Johnson. So the book is called Hold Me Tight. And so she's come up with a therapy for couples, and it is called emotionally focused therapy. And so what she talks about is understanding the dynamic that your relationship goes through when you have a disagreement. So does one person attack? Does one person retreat? You know, how does that play out? And so just learn, recognize the signs that you're going down a negative spiral. And through identifying what your typical spiral is, and through being more consciously aware of that feeling that we're descending, you're much more able to self-arrest and stop yourself and prevent yourself from going down the hole and call a timeout, for example. So that was a terrific learning. This kind of therapy, you can get it all over the place. If you know people that have difficult marriages, it could be the thing that helps them, save them. And so we have a tremendously, I would call it intimate relationship now, and we feel safe. You know, I'm able to distinguish that if Elizabeth is unhappy, it might be for her own reasons. It might not be, you know, my fault, you know, my problem. And so that's been a really important thing for me to find, is that you can't make someone else happy. Only you can make yourself happy. And Lan, how am I doing? Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first posted the event, so this event kind of happened organically. I wasn't planning an event for today. And then I had a call with James like last week, and we were just having this conversation, and we had this really profound, deep conversation about happiness. And, you know, I was like, well, let's just have a conversation. So this actually happened and transpired in like 4 or 5 days. So I'm glad everyone could make it, because I think it's such an important conversation. But when I posted about the event, I think it was like Friday or Saturday or so, there's people who are happy about the conversation. There's other people who are like, you should never chase happiness. And you actually got in a conversation with someone. And there's a lot of people who are like, you know, just this whole notion of like, happiness is fleeting, never chase it. And it was an interesting conversation, because I think the whole notion of what happiness is different for a lot of people. And when I think of happiness, I don't think of this raw, like, you know, life is great. Like, that's not what I think of when I define my sense of happiness. For me, it's about peace. It's about family. It's about that feeling after you help someone, and, or that feeling I get when I see my daughter smile, or when I'm in nature. That, for me, that's happiness. But some people equate happiness to money. Like, how do you, the other thing I wanted to kind of discuss with you too is the things that got us where we are today, the hard work, that relentlessness, that perfection, right? That got us to certain levels in our career, are not all the very things that kind of hold us back from happiness. So for me, it's that, like, that disconnect of like what brings us success and some type of comfort ultimately also kind of brings us the opposite at some point. So how do you kind of deal with that, you know, that battle?
That's a great, not counterpoint, but steer. So yeah, many people that are highly successful are driven on the inside by a need, you know, maybe a sense of inadequacy, you know, that there's a game that they're playing, that there are rules that about how we should live, you know, we need to succeed. And when you look at all of that external stuff, you know, it's a natural part of growing up is you know, church and your parents and school, teachers, professors, you know, neighbors, on and on, will, you know, give you scripts by which to live. You know, boys should be athletic and you know, violent and play football and not express their emotions and so on. And when women, you know, the opposite, all kinds of different scripts And you know, the more happy I become is when I drop those scripts and I try to you know, not prove things to other people. When I try to work on causes that are important to me, when I try to be giving to people and not live for external reasons, but really live for internal reasons. So in my executive coaching, I was saying to Lan earlier, you know, when we spoke last week, that I run into people who are highly successful, but they are really unhappy, and they're unhappy because they haven't really stopped to reflect on the balance that they have in their life. I'll tell you an assessment that I use. It's by a gentleman called Michael Hyatt. And if you look him up, he has an assessment. It's called the Life Score Assessment. And it's online and it's easy to find. It's free. And it's just a 10-factor life assessment for you to take a look at and say, where do I fall on all of these dimensions of life, from spiritual to vocation to health to family and on. And some people just don't stop and reflect on what's really important to them and how much time are they putting towards these things. And if you don't actually stop and reflect on your life, then you can just stay, like Lan was alluding to, in this habit of, you know, going to work early, staying late, checking your email. You know, you always know there's going to be an email waiting for you. But, you know, for me, I have an end of day and I put my phone down and I spend quality time with my partner because I've consciously stopped to reflect on that, you know, that I have other responsibilities. So there's very much an awareness, you know, a need to be consciously aware of how you know, how am I fulfilling my responsibilities in my many different roles. And you know, I have many different examples of people who have perpetuated their financial success, but to what cost? One friend I was thinking about overheard his two children talking, you know, while he was working hard and thinking that he was doing the best for his family, but his daughter was talking about how much she missed her father being at, you know, games and important things for her, and he realized that he'd lost perspective. So
it's interesting because in our last micro learning on mental health that Amy Yip, who's on this call, led, she asked, you know, the group, how many of you are like cognizant of your emotions and have control over your emotions and your actions? And I instinctively raised my hand because, you know, of course I'm woke. And she was like, none of you are. And, you know, like the more I think about it, I think about like I'm like in a meeting with my daughter, like, or I'm talking to my daughter and I'll instinctively pick up my phone and start scrolling, or because I hear a ping or whatnot. Just that one, you know, action of not even realizing that we are doing something and we are programmed by these pieces of technology to pick up the phone whenever we have a ping or a email that comes in is already a symbolism that we don't have kind of like our own control of our own mental thought, because there's other things that have programmed us, whether it's technology or parents or our teachers or whatnot. I'm going to thank you so much, James, for this conversation. This has been very, very fruitful and powerful. And I really want to say thank you for sharing being very vulnerable with your story. I'm going to do a quick breakout group, and then we can probably, I want to bring the group back for like a kind of a group discussion, if you guys don't mind. And I'm probably going to break you guys up in small groups of maybe 4 to 5. And I'm I'm going to have you kind of focus on this question. I want you to introduce yourself, your name, company, or a previous role you've had if you're not working. Please note, please keep these conversations private. Anything that happens in the breakout room stays in the room. We aren't recording anything in the breakout rooms. In your head right now, I want you to make a list of the 3 to 5 things that make you happy. Spending time with your family, being in nature, whatever it is. What are the 3 to 5 things that bring you joy, happiness? Now make a mental list in your head right now of what your normal day looks like. You wake up, you have coffee, you get on your computer, you work till 5 or 6 or 10 o'clock at night, you go to sleep. Now compare both lists, what makes you happy and what you're actually doing in your life. And I want you guys to discuss in the breakout groups. Okay. So I am going to see everyone before we head off. Any kind of like, let's open the conversation. First, I want to say thank you to James for being so vulnerable and sharing his story. And, you know, I think it's one of the key things I got from that was that whole introspection, and the reparenting thing really kind of resonated with me because, you know, some of us have not had the happiest of childhoods. And our actions and how we relate to the world is kind of subconsciously built into us. And I think part of happiness is stripping away the onion and really trying to figure out what is it that makes us really happy? Who are we at the end of the day? You know, what is our purpose in life? What were some of the conversations, if you guys, you know, don't mind sharing some, you know, your stories and conversations that you've had in the breakout rooms? Anyone want to share? Desiree, I know you had a good kind of like, if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, I think one of the interesting conversation we were talking about for me was at that point when I decided that I no longer wanted to go with all of the things that I'd been doing before, where I felt like I was just going along with it, you know, the next project within my job. And at some point, I wanted to be in control of what I was doing and then go with that flow and not really subscribe to what was expected of me within the confinement of a job for somebody else. So I think once I got to that point, I had to take some time off, you know, to kind of do exactly what you said, to kind of think about, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? You know, it's clear in my mind, but the execution, and it's, you know, it's been an interesting journey and it's still a journey, but I decided that I wanted to live between Jamaica and New York. So I executed that plan, which has been a big part of bringing me some peace. You know, I don't have to be in New York in the snow anymore.
24 inches last night. Yeah. Just saying.
Yeah. And so I'm still, you know, I'm still trying new things, which is really going with the flow of what I wanted to do. I'm trying new things that I would be interested in, and trying to get into things that are more creative, really trying to enjoy the things that I like to do and spend more time with the people that I probably should have spent more time with in the past. And now, you know, COVID has made you realize that you don't really have all that time to go back. As my aunt keeps reminding me, life is not a rehearsal. This is your final
not guaranteed.
Act. So well, she says it's not a rehearsal. You don't get to rehearse it and then do it. You just have to get on stage and live it. So
exactly. And it's so funny, like that freedom is like one of my big kind of like what I consider happiness is having freedom. And I remember I had my own business, and it was in a music industry. So I would take a percentage of the artist's, you know, performance fee. And I woke up one day and I was like, I don't want to be a percentage of someone else's career. I want to build my own career, right? And it was not logical, but I quit a very successful company because I realized it wasn't bringing me joy anymore, right? And I think action is very important. And we're almost kind of closing up, but I want, Preeti, I want to pronounce your name right. Can you pronounce your name? Is it Preeti?
It's Preeti.
Preeti. You, I was very impressed with, because I know you had a life-changing experience, but literally I had all of you guys tell me what are the things that make you happy and then compare it to what you actually do in the day. Because for most people, what they do every day isn't what actually makes them happy generally, right? And you literally had everything that made you happy you do every day. So I want you to kind of tell the group, like, what's your lesson and how you didn't do that before, and how that changed your life when you were able to clearly identify what made you happy and actually living it.
Okay, so I had to incorporate some changes. So I do 10 minutes of calm meditation in the morning before I get out of bed. I'm so high strung that I don't fall asleep when I'm meditating. So I can do it in bed. I do a gratitude journal. This is my gratitude journal from Amazon. I write 3 things that I'm thankful for every day during the day. I go on a 3-mile, 40-minute walk in the sun, and I enjoy gardens and houses and boats and things that I see on the way. I do Pilates a couple days a week, and I do scrapbooking on the weekends, making cards for my friends. And it's a creative outlet for me to pick colors and rhinestones and different things.
And so has that kind of like living your day-to-day life with what brings you joy, has that been kind of like a game changer for you?
Yeah, it's so much more calm, and I don't worry about as much. And I actually have changed that I don't really care what people think as much. Like, I honed in on my core values, and my core values are leadership, integrity, and continuous improvement. And I'm just going to be me. Like, if people don't like it or whatever, then I'm in the wrong place.
Awesome. Well, we are closing up. I just want to thank you so much for making this out. James, thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable with us. I thought it was very powerful. The one thing I hope you guys take from this is that don't wait for tomorrow for happiness. And happiness is really about is choice, right? We can choose to be happy, or we can kind of choose to live this kind of life where we're just kind of like robots. And I hope you get this experience from this, is just to kind of live now and be present. So our next conversation is a micro learning on, you'll love the topic, how to deal with assholes at work through play. And that's going to be in 2 weeks. And kind of, once again, part of happiness is getting rid of the assholes, right? So I will see you guys hopefully in 2 weeks. And once again, thank you, James. And I will see you guys. Make sure you guys connect with each other, LinkedIn, support each other offline as well. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks.
Bye. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.